She saved a seal in just 4 minutes. Then the FBI asked, "Where did you learn that?" Nobody in that airport terminal expected anything unusual that afternoon. It was a regular Tuesday. People were checking their phones, dragging their carry-on bags, grabbing overpriced coffee, and staring up at the departure boards. The kind of afternoon where absolutely nothing happens and everyone forgets it the moment they get home. But that Tuesday changed the life of a 34-year-old art teacher from a small town in Texas. And it changed the life of a Navy SEAL who should not have survived the day. Her name was Nora. She taught painting and drawing to 8- and 9-year-olds at a public elementary school. She had a classroom full of finger paintings and half-finished watercolors. She drove a 10-year-old car. She packed her own lunch. She was, by every measure of the word, an ordinary person. And that is exactly what makes this story worth telling. The day it happened, Nora was at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, waiting on a delayed flight to Phoenix. She was going to visit her younger sister for the weekend. Nothing special. She had a carry-on bag, a sketchbook she was doodling in, and a half-eaten granola bar sitting on the seat next to her. Gate 14 was packed. Families, business travelers, a few soldiers in uniform. The usual mix of strangers who would never see each other again. Nora had found a seat near the window and was sketching the way the afternoon light hit the tarmac outside. She liked doing that, finding something worth looking at in places that most people never really look. That habit of looking, really looking, is the reason a man is alive today. The man's name was Ray. He was 41 years old and had served as a Navy SEAL for over 20 years. He had been in places most people only see in news reports. He had carried wounded men through conditions that would be hard to describe to someone who had never been there. He was the kind of person who had spent 2 decades preparing for the worst and handling it when it came. He was standing near the gate, phone to his ear, finishing a call. He looked tired, the way people look when they've been traveling for too long. His bag was on the floor. He had a paper cup of coffee in his free hand. And then, without any warning at all, his heart stopped. It did not slow down first. It did not give him a chance to sit. One moment he was standing there, and the next, the cup hit the floor and he went down with it. That fast, that sudden. A cardiac arrest does not announce itself. It just arrives. The reaction from the people around him was something Nora would think about for a long time afterward. Phones came out. A few people stepped back. Someone called out, asking if there was a doctor. A gate agent grabbed her radio. A child started crying somewhere behind a row of seats. Nobody moved toward him. That is not a criticism. Most people freeze in moments like that. It is a human thing. The brain sees something it does not know how to handle, and it stalls. Seconds pass, then more seconds, and in a cardiac arrest, every one of those seconds matters more than most people realize. Nora had already put her sketchbook down. She was not running, exactly, but she was moving with a kind of calm focus that would later seem strange to the people who watched it. She crossed the space between her seat and where Ray had fallen, kneeled down beside him, and in one smooth motion tilted his head back and checked for breathing. There was none. She laced her fingers together, placed her hands on his chest, and started compressions. What she did next was not random. It was not panicked. The depth was right. The rhythm was right. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. She kept count in her head without losing pace. She was pressing hard enough to actually move his chest, which is harder than most people expect, and she did not slow down. Someone nearby offered to take over. She said, without looking up, "I have it. Get the defibrillator off that wall." The AED, the automated defibrillator, was in a red case on the wall, about 15 feet away. Most people walk past those boxes every day, in airports, malls, office buildings, and never give them a second glance. Nora had noticed it when she sat down. She had noticed where it was the same way she noticed the light on the tarmac. Just something her eyes had logged without making a big deal of it. When someone brought the box over and opened it, Nora peeled the backing off the pads without looking at the diagram, placed them correctly on Ray's chest, and stepped back when the machine told her to. The shock delivered. She watched. She waited the 2 seconds the machine needed to analyze. Then she went right back to compressions. 55 seconds later, Ray's chest rose on its own. His pulse came back. Faint, unsteady, but there. Nora sat back on her heels. She did not cheer. She did not cry. She just watched him breathing and waited for the paramedics, who arrived less than 2 minutes later. By the time the emergency crew had taken over and the crowd had started to settle, Nora had walked back to her seat. She picked up her sketchbook. She took a breath. She was shaking a little now, the adrenaline doing what adrenaline does when the urgency is gone. But she was okay. She did not tell anyone who she was. She gave her name to the paramedics when they asked, as a witness. She answered their questions. Then she sat back down and waited to see if her flight was going to board. It was not until about 40 minutes later that 2 men in plain clothes approached her. They were polite. They showed her their credentials. Special agents, Federal Bureau of Investigation. They sat down across from her and one of them leaned forward slightly, the way people do when they are about to ask something they have been thinking through carefully. "Ms. Nora," he said, "we have a few questions, and the main one is this. Where did you learn to do what you just did?" She told them the truth, because there was nothing else to tell. She had taken a CPR certification class 12 years earlier, when her school district required it for all staff. She had renewed the certification twice since then, both times in a gymnasium with a rubber dummy and a board instructor counting out loud. And she had once read an article about how to use an AED in a magazine at her dentist's office, probably 6 or 7 years ago. She could not even remember the name of the magazine. That was it. That was all of it. The agents looked at each other. Then the first one spoke again, slowly. He said that what she had done, the depth of her compressions, the rate, the timing of the shock, the way she had recognized from looking at Ray that his was a shockable rhythm rather than a different kind of cardiac event, was consistent with training that was normally only given to combat medics. Special operations level care, the kind of skill set that took months of intensive practice to develop, and she had done it, apparently, from a CPR class, 2 renewals, and 1 article in a dentist's waiting room. Nora sat with that for a moment. Then she said she was not sure what to do with that information. The agents smiled. They were not there to question her. They were there because they were genuinely impressed, and because they had a very different kind of question. Would she be willing to consult, in a small way, on a civilian emergency response awareness program they were working on? Something quiet. Something that did not require her to leave her classroom or change her life. Just her perspective, her experience, a few meetings, her input on how to teach ordinary people to act instead of freeze. She said she would think about it. She flew to Phoenix. She visited her sister. She came home. She said yes. What the FBI agents could not have known, and what Nora herself only understood later when she started talking through it with people she trusted, was why she had been able to do what she did. It was not special training. It was not some hidden background no one knew about. It was something much simpler, and in some ways more interesting than either of those things. Nora had grown up with a father who was a volunteer firefighter and a mother who was a nurse. Neither of them had ever sat her down and formally taught her anything medical, but dinner in that house sounded like a hospital briefing sometimes. Her mother would come home and talk through a case the way other parents talk about their workday. Her father would describe a call. They talked about what could go wrong with a body, and why, and what you did about it. Not to scare her, just because that was the language of their house. She had absorbed all of it. Not as knowledge exactly, more as texture, as a way of moving through the world with her eyes open. And then there was the classroom. 12 years of teaching children how to draw meant 12 years of teaching people to truly see what is in front of them, where the light falls, how a shadow changes the shape of something, the difference between what you think you see and what is actually there. Nora spent every working day asking children to slow down and look, really look, and not fill in the gaps with what they expected. She had been doing that to the world around her for so long that it had become part of how she operated. So when Ray's hand went to his chest a half-second before his knees buckled, she saw it. When his face changed color, she saw that too. And when she kneeled down and put her hands on his chest, Her body remembered what her mother's kitchen table conversations had built into her, without her even realizing it. Ray woke up in the hospital the next morning. His first question, according to the nurse who was there, was about the woman who had not stopped. He wanted to know who she was. The nurse found Nora's name in the incident report and passed it along. Ray sat with it. He is not, by his own description, a man who finds it easy to say certain things. 2 decades in the military will do that. You get used to getting on with it, pushing forward, not making too much of the hard moments because there is usually another hard moment right behind the first one. But this was different. He wrote her a letter, handwritten, 2 pages. He started it 3 times before he got past the first sentence. He wrote about how strange it was to owe his life to someone he had never met, about how, in his career, he had always been the one doing the saving, and what it felt like to be on the other side of that. He wrote that thank you was not big enough, but it was all he had, and he hoped she could feel the weight of it anyway. Nora received the letter 6 weeks after the airport. She read it twice at her kitchen table. Then she folded it carefully and put it in a drawer she does not open very often. Ray retired from the Navy about 6 months after that Tuesday, not because of his health, which his doctors said made a full recovery. He retired because, as he explained it to the people who asked, the experience of dying for 4 minutes and then not dying had rearranged some things in his head. He started a nursing program at 42 years old. He graduated. He works in a hospital now, and he is, by all accounts, one of the best people on his unit. Nora kept teaching. She also did those consultation meetings with the FBI program, quietly, without her name attached to any of it. The program eventually trained well over 100,000 people in basic emergency response. She does not talk about that either, unless someone asks directly. The 2 of them have spoken on the phone about a dozen times over the years. They have never met again in person. They both seem to be okay with that. Some things can stay at the distance you first found them and still mean everything. Here is the part of this story that stays with you. In the United States alone, more than 350,000 cardiac arrests happen outside of a hospital every year. Most of them happen in front of other people, and the survival rate is somewhere around 10%. Not because the treatment is impossible, not because the equipment is unavailable, but because most people, when they see someone collapse, do not act. They wait for someone else to act. They assume someone more qualified is about to appear. They stand and watch and hope. Nora did not wait, not because she was fearless or specially trained or somehow different from everyone else at Gate 14, but because she had spent her whole life paying attention. She had a nurse for a mother and a firefighter for a father and 12 years of teaching children to see the world clearly. She had taken a CPR class and renewed it, not because she thought she would ever use it, but because the school required it and she showed up. She showed up. That's all it was. The most powerful thing about this story is not the 4 minutes. It is not the FBI agents or the handwritten letter or the program that trained over 100,000 people. The most powerful thing is how ordinary Nora was before it happened, and how ordinary she remained after it. She went back to her classroom. She kept teaching children to look at the light on things. She kept packing her own lunch. She just also happened to be the reason a good man is still alive. And somewhere in a hospital, that man is doing the same thing for someone else. Because someone chose to pay attention on a Tuesday afternoon. Because someone got up, walked across a terminal, and did not look away. That is it. That is the whole story.